There is a kind of heartbreak that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't shatter dishes or slam doors. It arrives quietly in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, when you reach for your phone to call someone and then remember they chose to leave and they never looked back. Keeya Montrose knew that kind of heartbreak better than most. She had carried it for 20 years, through floodwaters and fallen walls, through sleepless nights and silent mornings. Through every single moment she built something beautiful from nothing, while the man she loved was somewhere on the other side of the world, living a life that no longer included her. She had survived. She had arisen. She had become something even she couldn't have imagined in those dark days. But survival doesn't always mean healing, and sometimes the past doesn't stay where you buried it. Sometimes it buys a first-class ticket, lands at Louis Armstrong Airport on a Wednesday evening, and walks straight back into the city you rebuilt without him. New Orleans breathed differently in the evening. The air was thick and warm, carrying the smell of jasmine and river water, and something that could only be described as memory. It was the kind of city that held on to its people, even when its people tried to let go. Keeya Montrose stood on the rooftop terrace of the Montrose Grande, her hotel, her crown jewel, the centerpiece of a real estate empire that had taken 20 years and every drop of her strength to build. At 51 years old, she was stunning in a way that had nothing to do with youth and everything to do with a woman who had been through fire and come out the other side knowing exactly who she was. She held a glass of red wine loosely in her fingers and looked out over the city she had refused to abandon. New Orleans glittered below her, the lights of the French Quarter, the curve of the Mississippi, the neighborhoods that had once been underwater, her neighborhoods, now restored and alive and breathing again. She had done that, not alone, never truly alone, but she had been the one who stayed when everyone else was deciding whether to come back. Her assistant, Maya, appeared at the rooftop door, tablet in hand, her expression carrying that particular look that meant something unexpected had come up. "Miss Montrose, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a name on tomorrow's property viewing list I thought you should know about before the morning." Keeya didn't turn around immediately. She took one more sip of wine, one more look at the city, one more breath of that thick New Orleans air. "What name?" she asked. Maya hesitated just long enough for Keeya's stomach to tighten. Yong Sun Park. The wine glass didn't fall. Keeya's face didn't crumble. 20 years of building herself from the ground up had given her a stillness that very few people could rattle. But inside, in that deep, protected place she had sealed shut a long time ago, something moved, like a door she thought was locked forever had just shifted on its hinges. She set the wine glass down, carefully, on the ledge. "Cancel it," she said quietly. "Miss Montrose, cancel the viewing, Maya." She walked back inside without another word, but she stood at the window for a long time after Maya left, looking at nothing, feeling everything. To understand what that name meant to Keeya Montrose, you had to go back to when she was 31 years old and the city was whole, and she was in love in the reckless, unguarded way that only happens once in a lifetime, if you're lucky. Yong Sun Park had come to New Orleans on a business internship. He was 29, quietly intense, with a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in any room you shared with him. He had walked into the small architecture firm where Keeya worked as a junior designer, and within 3 months, they were inseparable. Their love was not simple. Nothing real ever is. His family in Seoul had plans for him, a Korean woman from a good family, a future that looked exactly the way they had drawn it. Yong Sun was the eldest son, and in his world, that carried a weight that Keeya tried to understand but could never fully feel in her bones the way he did. They argued about it in the quiet, desperate way that people argue when they love each other but can see the ending coming and can't stop it. "I need more time," he would say. "You've been saying that for a year," she would answer. And then one morning in July 2005, he sat across from her at her small kitchen table in the Traim neighborhood and told her he was going back to Seoul. His father was ill. The family needed him. He would come back. He promised he would come back. Keeya looked at him for a long time across that table. "Don't make promises you're asking your family to break for you," she said softly. He left 2 days later. He did not come back. For weeks, she waited. She called. She wrote. The calls became less frequent on his end, and then one day a woman answered his phone in Korean, and Keeya sat on the edge of her bed and understood without needing a translation. She cried for 3 days. Then she got up. She had no way of knowing that in 6 weeks, a storm was coming that would take everything else, too. When Hurricane Katrina made landfall on August 29th, 2005, Keeya was still in the city. She had nowhere certain to go, and something stubborn and deep in her refused to leave the only home she had ever known. She rode out the storm in her second-floor apartment in the Traim, listening to the world outside come apart. When the levees broke, the water came fast. She lost her furniture first, then her files, then the portfolio of architectural drawings she had spent 3 years building, her designs, her dreams, everything she had planned to build her career on. She watched them float and then sink in the dark brown water that filled her street like the city was being swallowed whole. She stood on her roof for 2 days before help came. 2 days of heat and silence and the distant sound of helicopters that weren't coming for her. 2 days of thinking about everything she had lost, the man who left, the city that was drowning, the future she had drawn so carefully in those architectural sketches, now dissolving in floodwater. She could have broken there, on that roof, under that brutal August sun. But Keeya Montrose had a particular relationship with destruction. It made her quiet. And when she got quiet, she got clear. By the time the boat came to take her to dry land, she had already decided. She was not leaving New Orleans. She was going to rebuild it. What followed was not a montage of triumph. It was years of grinding, unglamorous work that most people never saw and never knew about. Keeya got her contractor's license at 33. She took every job she could find in the rebuilding effort. Small jobs, underpaid jobs, jobs that other people thought were beneath someone with her education. She didn't care. She was learning. She was watching. She was understanding how the city was being put back together, and more importantly, where the opportunities were being missed. She saw entire blocks of historic New Orleans homes being sold for almost nothing because the owners had left and didn't believe the city would recover. She scraped together every dollar she had and borrowed the rest, and bought her first property at 35, a damaged shotgun house in the Traim, the same neighborhood she had lost everything in. She restored it herself, nights and weekends, her hands in the plaster and the wood and the history of that house. When she sold it, she bought 2 more, then 4. Then she stopped selling and started building a portfolio, There were nights she sat on the floor of whatever property she was working on and let herself feel the full weight of the loneliness. No partner, no safety net, just her and the work and the city and the stubborn belief that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She never stopped missing him. She simply refused to let the missing stop her. By 45, she had 30 properties across New Orleans. By 48, she broke ground on the Montrose Grande, a luxury boutique hotel in the heart of the city built on land that had been abandoned after Katrina, a monument to everything that had survived. New Orleans Magazine called her the woman who refused to let the city forget itself. She framed that article, hung it in her office. Not because she needed the validation, but because that 31-year-old woman sitting on a rooftop in floodwater deserved to see how the story turned out. Yong Sun Park had built his own life in the 20 years since he left New Orleans. He had married as his family wanted, built a successful property development company in Seoul, had all the things that were supposed to make a man feel complete. His wife had passed away 4 years ago after a long illness. His children were grown. His father, who had pulled him back to Korea, was gone too. And in the silence that follows when all the obligations have been fulfilled and all the reasons you told yourself justified your choices are no longer there to hide behind, in that silence, Yong Sun found himself thinking about New Orleans, about a kitchen table in the Treme, about a woman who had looked at him across that table and told him not to make promises he was asking his family to break for him. He had told himself over the years that he had made the right choice, that she would have moved on, that she was fine. It was only when he started researching investment opportunities in New Orleans and pulled up the name Montrose Development Group that he sat back in his chair and felt the full weight of what he had walked away from. He booked his flight that same evening. He told himself it was business. He knew it wasn't. He found her anyway. New Orleans was not a city that hid its legends. She was coming out of a site meeting on a restored block in the 9th Ward when she saw him, standing by a car across the street. 20 years older, quieter in his bearing, but unmistakably him. Keeya stopped walking. The site crew moved around her like water around a stone. He crossed the street slowly, the way a man walks when he's not sure of his welcome, but has run out of reasons to stay away. They stood 3 feet apart on a sidewalk in New Orleans on a Thursday afternoon, and 20 years compressed into a single moment of silence. "Keeya," he said. She looked at him for a long time, at the gray at his temples, at the way he held himself. Still that same stillness, but heavier now, weighted with something she recognized because she carried it too. "You canceled the viewing," he said. "I did. I came anyway. I can see that." Another silence. A car passed. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing a trumpet. "I heard what you built," he said quietly. "I've been following it for years. I don't know if that makes it better or worse." Keeya tilted her head slightly. "It makes it honest, which is more than I could say for the goodbye." He flinched, just slightly, but she saw it. "I don't have a defense," he said. "I've tried to build one for 20 years, and I don't have one. I was a coward. I chose the easier thing, and I told myself it was duty." Keeya was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said simply. "I'm not here to ask you to forgive something that size," he said. "I just needed you to know that not a version of my life existed or I didn't know I made the wrong choice." The trumpet down the block drifted up into the warm New Orleans air. Keeya looked at this man who had left her on a kitchen table 20 years ago, who had not been there when the water came, who had missed every hard year and every triumphant one. And she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not the old grief. Something quieter and more complicated than either of those. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes," she said finally. He nodded, started to turn. "Yong Sun." He stopped. "There's a restaurant on Magazine Street, closed on Sundays. I own it." She paused. "I'll be there Sunday morning at 9. She didn't wait for his answer. She walked back toward her crew, her city, her life. But for the first time in a long time, she walked with something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Not closure, something more dangerous than that. Hope. Some people come back into your life like storms, loud and destructive, taking more than they give. And some come back like the season changing, quietly, inevitably, in a way that makes you wonder if the years in between were never really lost, just necessary. Keeya Montrose had built an empire on the belief that what survives the flood is worth more than what was never tested. Maybe that was true of people too. Maybe that was true of love. This is Two Can Play, where love crosses cultures and where every story worth telling begins with the truth of what we carry and what we choose, even after everything, to pick back up. If this story moved you, subscribe, because there are more where this came from, and we're just getting started.